What's up guys, and in today's video I'm going to be going through mindset death loops, 10xing that value, and also bridging the gap, why this is important and how I'm actively thinking about 10xing the value, how killing my old self ultimately is going to reshape how we're going to be building inside Killer Chaos OS. So like always with these videos, the main mission is to show our builds raw and real, to show you the good, the bad, the ugly, what it is that I'm actively implementing in terms of mental models and how I'm scaling those mental models into the future, and also just to solve what hurts within businesses and organizations, just to ultimately come in and be the chief problem solvers and ultimately build back-end infrastructure off of that. And also just to call in visionaries, basically people aligned with the mission of what it is that we're actively doing, and also just to build a network of cool people doing cool things at the same time. So this one's going to be a super fun one. I'm super excited because this is one of probably the most transformational things that has happened to me in recent times to ultimately shape how I am and also what it is that we're building inside Killer Chaos OS, because bridging the gap ultimately means you're killing who you are. And I think each and every person goes through this stage, especially with me, just ultimately saying, hey, I'm killing who I was before, and that is ultimately growth, and saying, hey, growth isn't just progress, it's death. And this death comes in many shapes or forms to ultimately say, hey, you are growing as a person, and how do you do that? You ultimately mutate or you transform into this person that you need to become to reach that ultimate goal, because you don't evolve basically by tweaking, you evolve by shredding. And that means killing your old self, basically killing the person that I was a year or 2 years ago in order to build and become the person that you need to become into the future. But in order to do that, it does take time, and at least from what I've realized, it's a long process and it's super slow, but you ultimately just need to be patient in what it is that we're doing. And I think patience is going to be one of the strongest assets that I need to incorporate into my daily life in terms of just transforming into the person that I need to become, because ultimately the person that you need to become and bridging that gap ultimately is a time constraint. At least from what I found, you need to just be consistent and keep acting on it and saying, hey, each and every single day I failed so many times. You would not believe how many times I got sucked into imposter syndrome and ultimately doing things that weren't aligned with the vision of Killer Chaos OS or the vision of myself that I have right now. But ultimately, in order to get there, you need to go through certain things. And that means, for example, with these videos, I realized that everything I did for day 1 to 50, all the actionable steps that I took for day 1 to 50, it's not enough. It's not enough to get from day 51 to 100. We ultimately just need to make sure that I'm shredding the old person of who I was, saying, hey, if I want to make a video, why don't I just do it now? And I think just having that raw, sheer execution has transformed so many things within my personal life, and also just the network that I have been fortunate enough to grow, to say, hey, the old person or the old version of me would have said, hey, let me spend some time thinking about, how I can perfect these videos and ultimately make them, perfect, because I want to show that off. But, this new version of myself that, I've ultimately had to, shed off the old self has said, hey, why don't I just do it? If I think of something, why don't I just build it? And that, procrastination of itself of me has ultimately died in terms of, just making videos and just sheer raw execution, because now I see, the power of, just ultimately just, execution. And that is, plays into many different aspects in terms of your daily life. For example, for me now, with these daily videos, I want to set really hard goals to say, hey, let's do 100. From this, what else can we set that is an ultimate hard goal? Because I want to become the person that is, quote unquote, worthy of, receiving all the things that are going to be coming my way into the future, and also just being a valuable person. And I think one of the most important things that I want to, bridge and also, become is ultimately the person that, is energetic each and every single day, the person that just executes and doesn't sit on things and doesn't wait. And ultimately just becoming that person means that you have to go through this transformational period where you basically have to kill who you are. But ultimately that is not a one-day thing. That simply does not happen in one day. For example, with these daily videos, I struggled, the first 10, 20, just, learning how to speak, and, also ultimately saying, hey, I want to compress this knowledge or what I have, that I struggled a lot in the first 10 to 20 days. But ultimately, through time and just patience, and ultimately just doing these daily 50 videos each and every single day. It's reshaped every single facet within my personal life, which we're going to get to just now. But ultimately saying, hey, this is not just simply just about adding more, it's about becoming more valuable. And I think one of the key things that I want to ultimately, that I've ultimately strived for throughout my whole life is just trying to become the most valuable person that I possibly can be in that point in time, because when opportunities come, I need to make sure that I'm in the best possible state, I like to think of it, that I can possibly be, so that I can provide value. And I think the number one thing that I just want to focus on is just providing value simply in every facet of my life. I just want to just be that person that is the most valuable person in the room, because once you're the most valuable person in the room, so many other things are open, so many other doors or avenues are opened simply through that. And how I'm going to do that? Through small consistent actions, because those actions compound. The way that I think, the way that I talk, and the way that I communicate, all those things take time. And ultimately saying, hey, I needed to kill the old version of myself in order to become this new person that, if I fail, that's okay. I just need to keep on going. If I, feel like I don't want to do work today, I just ultimately just need to say, hey, we need remember what the mission is, and we need to get things done. I don't need to, relax, or, just think about, coasting off, or just taking my foot off the pedal. I ultimately just need to focus on what actually matters, and that, from at least the past few, 50 videos, is just raw execution and just executing at the highest degree each and every single day. By far, I am, so far off from, the states or the place that I want to be, and that's okay. But ultimately, how can I bridge that gap? Through small, consistent actions each and every single day. I believe that is what is going to take me to the next level. And I know that each and every single day, I need to just make sure that I am letting go of the old person that I was before, in order to shape the new vision, and also make sure that I'm leading the team better, which is one of the most important things. And I'm super proud so far about how far we've come within these 50 videos. I mean, so many things have happened that I could not even have imagined happening. And I think, just if it wasn't for raw sheer execution and killing my old self, of saying, hey, I need to make sure before I post a video, I need to make sure I edit it, I need to make sure it's perfect, and all these things, because all these things just ultimately remove clarity. And all you need is clarity. And how do you gain that clarity? At least from what I find, is just sheer raw execution, and just saying, hey, let me set a hard goal, and let me just act on it, and actively just strive to build it, which is ultimately, reshaping who I am. Because I see myself 10, 20 years from now just being the person that ultimately, is undeniable, and just consistently takes those actionable steps each and every single day to build the future. Because how can you, at least I like to think about it, of saying, hey, how can I want to climb, Mount Everest, if I can't even climb a hill, like a small hill across the street or wherever? How can I expect to climb such a big goal if I can't even do this? So it's comparing and saying, hey, if I want to do, the goals that I want to set for Killer Chaos OS, or for me internally, how do I expect to do that if I can't even do 100 days consistent? And actively just saying, hey, this is basically bridging the gap and shaping me into the person that I need to become, and asking the questions of saying, hey, what are the actionable steps that I need to take on a day-to-day basis that ultimately kill this old version of myself, and also become the person that attracts all these different things within my life? It sounds cliche from time to time, but I know that into the future, this way that I'm thinking about it is ultimately going to shape how we build and how we scale into the future. We're going to make so many mistakes, like I always say, but I know that, just by taking these small, consistent, actionable steps each and every single day, we're going to get one step closer. And ultimately, that is going to be the most value that we can possibly do for ourselves in this current present moment in time. And saying, hey, let's just dive into the strategy of how I'm actively thinking about this. I want to 10x everything. I want to 10x my value output. I want to 10x my thinking. And this ultimately requires me to then say, hey, I need to redefine how I'm basically doing everything, every facet of my life, how I'm thinking, how I deliver, how I communicate, how I listen, and how I leverage failure. Basically saying, hey, how I think. Do I think in mental models? Do I think in structures? Because ultimately, I need to redefine what it is that I'm doing today in order to shape the future for tomorrow. I had a Instagram live with a very big person in the space a while back, and they literally told me that, hey, if I want to become the person that does XYZ, I need to just kill everything and just ultimately just flip the switch and 10x whatever I'm doing. And that is something that I'm now, super, super deep into, saying, hey, how can I actively just 10x what I'm doing, 10x how I deliver, 10x how I communicate in every single facet of my life, and just ultimately get one step closer to the vision. For example, how I, basically communicate, 10xing that through these daily videos each and every single day is shaping how I communicate, how I'm able to just riff off of, just this PowerPoint presentation without any like real preparation to say, hey, let me spend 30 to 2 hours, just reciting this after I built it out, and just saying, hey, I built it out, let's go, let's rip. And then also just saying, hey, how do I then leverage how how I deliver? Just basically shipping each and every single day. If I think of something, why don't I just build it now? Not waiting 10, 20 years to build it. Why don't I just build it today? And I think this is ultimately going to redefine how I'm thinking, how I'm actively building into the future, by actively just, just having that sheer sense of urgency and taking it to a whole new level. But I think one of the most important things is, just having urgency, but accompanying that with focus as well, is ultimately going to get ultimately get us one step closer to where we need to be, and saying, hey, I'm not just trying to be consistent, I'm trying to be undeniable, to say, hey, what it is that I have to do, I'm just undeniably good at it. And how do I do that? I just need to take the actionable steps and redefine every single facet of my life, especially when it comes to leveraging failure, because I think one of the most important things along this journey is failure, and how you combat and respond to failure. Because I know so many times we're going to fail, and that's okay, but then it becomes a question of how can we leverage this failure, how can we leverage how we're failing in terms of our mental models, in terms of how we're thinking. And I think this is going to be where the gold is going to be, because if we think about leveraging failure, we're then thinking of the positives that we can create from failure, basically saying, hey, if we're failing so many times, how can we then turn this into a W? Basically saying, hey, how do we build better feedback cycles? How do we build better mental models and feedback loops as well? Saying, hey, how can we basically structure this? In example, if you've seen my previous video, one of the early videos that I did, the chaos feedback cycle, and basically say, hey, this is how we're actively thinking about feedback, basically categorizing it, and then ultimately using this as leverage in terms of failure, so that when we do fail, we ultimately understand that, hey, this is what we need to do, and not just implementing in terms of what it is that we're doing for Killer Chaos OS, but also in my personal life, to say, hey, I need to make sure that I'm leveraging feedback and also leveraging failure, and ultimately using this as, data points in order to build better and scale better into the future. Because I know we're going to fail so many times, because we're still super early into this, journey. And I think failure is going to be one of the most important, feedback loops that we're going to have in terms of scaling and building better into the future, and saying, hey, I'm actively, breaking the way that I frame offers. How do I basically frame offers in the way that, it is ultimately value driven? How do I provide more value and frame it better? And saying, hey, is the messaging positioning off? How do I actively just 10x how I'm actively doing this? And saying, hey, I'm rewriting docs, so strategy docs. So how can I basically rewrite the docs, because I want to rewrite or 10x each and every single facet of my life to make it more high leverage? And how can I actively think about this? Just asking those simple questions, I think ultimately has brought me a new level of awareness that I wouldn't have had before if it wasn't for that. And saying, hey, I'm rebuilding how I ask questions in advisory calls. So basically the chaos advisory, advisory board that I spoke about a couple days ago, to ultimately say, hey, how do I then leverage this chaos advisory board, and ultimately use this in a way that ultimately builds how we build Killer Chaos OS. And also saying, hey, how do I ask better questions? Because I think asking better questions shows clarity and also gets you to the root cause of what it is that you're actively building for and solving for, and saying, hey, if we ask better questions, we are ultimately gaining more clarity and are able to then understand each and every single aspect or each and every single facet or data point that may arise into the future, so that we can take that into consideration and ultimately build better. Because I know that into the future, data is going to be one of the most important things in terms of how we're building, how we're failing, and how we're scaling is going to be super valuable and super important. And also rethinking what value actually means in every interaction. question. Asking the question of, hey, I want to do value, or I want to create value, but what does value actually mean? What does my value actually entail? How can I basically think about how my value output is? Is value through a conversation? Is it sharing, knowledge to other people? How can I actively, understand what value actually means in every single facet, and ultimately 10xing that value once I fully understand what it is, and saying, hey, value isn't just speaking to people. How can I ultimately redefine or re-understand or rewrite how I'm thinking in terms of value and also value output? How can I 10x that into the future? And I know that this is ultimately going to scale how we're going to be doing and how we're going to be building Killer Chaos OS into the future, and also most importantly into my daily life, and saying, hey, failure is fuel. Most importantly, I think I'm not ashamed of missed deals, no replies, no broken builds. I'm gonna take accountability. Most importantly, I think one of the most important things is to realize when you've messed up and say, hey, it's all my fault, and I messed up, and that's okay. Now how can I make it right? Because I think that level of accountability ultimately just allows you to then say, hey, okay, this is how I failed, this is how I messed up. Ultimately, how can I build better and scale better into the future? I think just ultimately using this as well and saying, hey, this taught me patience, it made me sharper. Ultimately saying, hey, failure is turning me into a sharper operator, and this sharper operator, or this vision of myself, is going to be the person that fails but takes accountability, and that ultimately shapes or is the person that I need to become in order to be the person that builds Killer Chaos OS into the vision that I have for it, and ultimately say, hey, this is just one of the things that we need to go through in terms of using failure as fuel, and saying, hey, one failed feature taught me what more than 10 successful ones, and saying, hey, in as much as we build successful features and we do all these things that end up as success, what are the things that we fail at, and how can we get more nuggets off of that? Because I think your greatest lessons, or the greatest lessons that at least I've experienced, come from the biggest failures that I've had in my life, and saying, hey, how have those failures taught me in terms of how we're going to build into the future. For example, just a quick story. I did some work in terms of making videos and stuff like that, and I think one of the most biggest lessons I've learned is ultimately just never giving up on my dreams, and ultimately understanding that I need to be uncompromising in terms of what it is that I need to do, and shaping the vision of Killer Chaos OS and myself, and also becoming that person. Because one of the biggest things that I did a couple of years back was ultimately taking things and saying, hey, let me do this, and falling into shiny object syndrome, and that allowing me to not become the true essence of who I am and how I am building into the future. But then that also made me sharper. It also made me understand that, hey, I need to make sure that I'm hitting the nail in the wall, just constantly redefining how I'm thinking about things, and becoming the person that is worthy, or that attracts all these different opportunities, and saying, hey, one bad week forced me to redefine outreach, and now it is ultimately helping, enabling us to then ultimately reach out to the 500k planners, so basically our ICP, and saying, hey, they're actively just building this, and we are actively also just understanding that, hey, these people that we are targeting, we're actively now just building towards them, and saying, hey, now we're actively landing them in the terms of we're getting conversations, and that we're speaking to them, and that we're just bouncing off ideas, which is one of the most important things, and not just focusing on the deal, saying, hey, we just want a deal, but just actively just having those conversations and just asking questions. I think that is what encompasses landing those specific ICPs, and saying, hey, if I didn't fail then, I wouldn't be dangerous now. Ultimately saying, hey, if I didn't fail back then, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. So I'm super grateful for all those lessons, all those failures, because they've ultimately shaped me into the person that I am today, and ultimately using that as fuel, and saying, hey, failure is feedback. It basically gives us data points, and failure also just drives or creates fuel for what it is that we need to do into the future, which I am super patient and super excited about each and every single day. For some people, I think they don't like to fail, but for me, I just love to fail in a good way, I like to say, hey, if I'm failing, I'm learning, and that's the most important thing. But that also tied with patience and long-term thinking, I think is only gonna drive who I become or who we become into the future, which is I'm not here for virality. I don't want to be famous. I don't want to, be the person that says all these flashy things, and I'm not here for likes. I just want to think long term, and I want to use these videos as a platform for myself to better enable how I'm thinking, how I'm restructuring deals, and also just understanding how I can 10x and sheer raw execution as well to say, hey, I need to become a better person or a sharper operator. And how do I do that? Redefining how I think, how I communicate, how I deliver, and how I leverage failure, and also how I listen. And that ultimately comes through making these videos. And so many things I never thought that I would be able to learn just simply just making these videos, and how it's shaped me over the past 55 videos, 56 now, and just also ultimately redefining how I've thought about just making content and just making videos, because I'm super grateful for that as well. And that also says, hey, I'm here for leverage. So 100 videos equals 100 new insights equals one refined system. Ultimately using these videos as a learning machine, ultimately saying, hey, we have 100 videos, that's 100 insights, and that equals one refined machine. And that one refined machine is worth all of those 100 different insights, because these insights are basically shaping how we're building Killer Chaos OS and how I'm building myself as well, to say, hey, these videos aren't just just are there for vanity, but they're also ultimately there to sharpen my insights, to make sure that, hey, even though I'm failing in certain aspects, I'm basically learning, gaining new insights, and that also equals one refined system and also one refined person. Because 100 videos in, I'm sure I would not even be the same person that I was in day one. And also ultimately understanding that and saying, hey, 100 different convos could lead to one $10 million idea. Ultimately just understanding that, hey, these different ideas that we have, we can ultimately have them just by having different conversations and speaking to different people, gathering those data points, which I think is going to be super important. And I understand that if I did not do this, or if I did not think about this in this way, it wouldn't have allowed me to get to where I am right now, which I'm still super far off. I'm nowhere at all. But ultimately I know that there's a lot of growth and a lot of lessons to be learned, and I'm ultimately gonna keep pushing the needle until we ultimately get there. And I think the most important thing is using this as compound thinking, which is one of the most important things, to say, hey, I'm actively building my compound thinking and saying, hey, how can I structure how I'm thinking today into new insights for the future, and basically using these 100 videos into 100 insights into one refined machine, or one refined version of myself, and saying, hey, this is one of the most important things, and saying, hey, and patience is the price of that kind of power. I think just being patient and just having a long-term vision is going to be one of the most important things, and something that I like to keep in mind each and every single day, that, hey, I'm playing a long-term game, and that's okay. How can I just expand my time horizon and just scale, not think about just making it today and just scaling that into the future, but also providing value and redefining how I think of value into the future, but not just say, hey, I need to get XYZ done today, but just expanding that time horizon, because I know we're going to get there. It's just a question of when. But also that also needs to be tied with never stop being the most valuable person in the room. And I think once this landed with me back in the day, I think this has always been my mindset. I always thought to myself when I was growing up to say, hey, when I turn 20 to 30, these are the years that I'm just gonna go foot on the pedal, just 100% just rip and just build a lot of things, and a lot of things happen, and I do realize that, hey, in the first year or two, I may have not been building as much as I would have liked to, but I have stayed with the same mindset, and now saying, hey, I understand that, but I also need to realize that accompanied with that, these are the years that I need to build in order to become the most valuable, quote unquote, valuable person in the room. And I think this is a mindset thing more than anything else. Basically asking the question of how can I be more valuable, in the sense of saying, hey, I don't just arrive, I evolve. How can I become the person that ultimately builds, a 500-person company that basically builds or reshapes industries? What is the version of myself that I need to become in order to get there, and then taking those daily consistent actions towards that. For example, these daily videos are just a key step in that, and saying, hey, the minute you stop sharpening yourself, you start declining. Comfort is the killer of growth, and that is one of the things that I've learned, that you stop growing as soon as comfort starts hitting. And I don't want to make sure that comfort hits. I want to make sure that, hey, I'm just executing raw, and I'm just building. And I know that into the future this is going to play such a key role in what it is that we're going to be building into the future, whether it's Killer Chaos OS or something else. I'm just super excited, and I'm going to keep that same frame of mind that I have been keeping, of saying, hey, how can I actively become the most valuable person in the room? And saying this mindset is not an ego side of things. It's just asking, hey, how can I provide so much value to everyone else and not expect anything back in return? But how can I just become the most valuable person in the room and just give, and ultimately that is going to allow them to 10x what they're doing, ultimately, which is the most important thing. But also it's going to sharpen you into a better operator. And this is just my personal belief, and I know that into the future I'm going to fail so many times, and I'm going to also learn a lot, which is going to be one of the most important things, to just keep on learning a lot, because I think this game is just the person that you evolve into and the person that you become each and every single day is the most important thing about the journey, more than anything else. And saying, hey, I stay obsessed with this question each and every single morning. This is the one question that I am super dialed in and obsessed, and saying, hey, how can I become the most valuable person for this planner, founder, or friend that I speak to today? How can I basically become the most valuable person in the room, and just taking those daily actions to constantly say, hey, I want to become the most valuable person, and how can I do that? Is it me just reading a lot more? Is it me just building a lot more? And one of the things that at least I found today, or not today but recently, is ultimately I just need to be building a lot more. I need to get deep into the trenches again and just ultimately just build, because ultimately that is going to be what's going to compound into the future. And just staying in the trenches and just building and just executing, I think that's the number one thing that I personally just need to be focusing and zeroing in on each and every single day. Cranking out those 12 hours to 16 hours each and every single day, I think that is the phase and stage that I'm at right now, and I just ultimately just need to build, and that is the number one thing that I solely need to just focus on. And then saying, hey, because this is what creates gravitational pull, this is what basically pulls in the opportunities that come your way, that basically attracts each and everything that you could ever dream of. I super bullish on this, super bullish. And saying, hey, this is how you basically build a category defining company, and this is just my personal take on it. This is how I think into the future we will basically build a category defining company in terms of Killer Chaos OS, how we're going to scale that into the future, and the scale of problems that we're going to be solving for. I know we're still a long way back, like super far and nowhere near to the goal, but ultimately I know these videos are ultimately going to be the insights that are ultimately going to allow us to refine our machine and ultimately allow us to scale better and build better into the future. And I'm super excited. Yesterday's pod was super fun. Shout out to Ryan as well for joining and sharing some source, and I just hope that one day I'll be able to also share some source to future people as well, when when things happen. But ultimately I'm super excited, I'm super pumped. Gonna be building as usual, gonna be refining, gonna be failing as well, and I'm gonna be sharing all those insights that I have until day 100 and possibly more. So I'm super excited. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to connect with me on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I will see you guys in the next video.